And now, having reached this point in time, it is instructive, we think, to look back over the college's past, but primarily as a springboard for the college's present and its future. It may be thought incongruous by some that a philosopher should be asked to introduce an historian. For historians, like detectives, are often thought of as dealing only with the facts. But I am more inclined to agree with H.G. Wells, who remarked in his monumental work, The Outline of History, that human history is in essence a history of ideas. I am particularly pleased to welcome to this podium this morning Dr. Stephen J. Tonsor, Associate Professor of History at the University of Michigan. Dr. Tonsor holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Illinois in 1948 with a major, interestingly enough, in philosophy. A doctorate from the University of Illinois in history in 1955. He has been a member of the faculty of the University of Michigan since 1954, where he is now Associate Professor of History. He is an author of note, interested particularly in modern European intellectual history, and more specifically in the German youth movements. I am therefore particularly pleased to introduce to you and to welcome to this podium Dr. Stephen J. Tonsor, who will address us on the topic, the Church-Related College, Special Mission, or Educational Anachronism. Dr. Tonsor.
Thank you, Dean Bailey, for your very generous and graceful introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored and very pleased that you've permitted me to share this anniversary celebration with you. At a time when novelty and revolution have become the commonplaces of our daily lives, it is well occasionally to reflect on the advantages of tradition and stability and the comeliness of age. It's a proud achievement to have survived for a century. To be able to say with D.H. Lawrence, "Look, we have come through." But if survival were the only achievement, your celebration might have to be tempered by a consideration of the cost in terms of compromise and accommodation which most survival entails. To have survived a century and at the same time to have remained true to one's commitment and dedicated to one's central purpose is as great an achievement as it is rare, and I congratulate you. Increasingly, though, the question is being asked whether the Church-Related College is not, in fact, an anachronism, whether or not it has anything to say to contemporary American society, whether or not it plays a significant role in that society. There are many who argue that the Church-Related College is indeed an anachronism, that at best it represents the pressed flower school of education, and that at worst it is constitutionally incapable of recognizing or dealing effectively with the major concerns of our society. In a megalopolitan culture, the church-related school usually lacks the stature which hugeness bestows, and it discovers that its resources must be husbanded and its priorities constantly debated, while its secular competitors outbid it, outdazzle it, and outspend it on every hand. Its president learns every day anew that being different is a very expensive undertaking. And institutionally, the church-related school finds it extremely difficult to resist the powerful pull of the gravitational mass of secular education. It is indeed the ancient Christian problem of being in the world but not of it, a problem made more difficult by the fact that a substantial part of education is secular in its concerns and worldly in its orientation. Is it really very difficult to understand why, increasingly, church-related colleges are quietly de-emphasizing their church connection and reshaping their purposes to conform more completely to the secular model? Is it hard to understand why students, faculty, administration model themselves on the state universities and the handful of great private secular schools, rather than going on their own way and keeping to their own purposes? But to persist in this homogenization of American education will lead us not only to betray a heritage and liquidate a great and productive tradition, but will eventually vitiate all those qualities that mark the civilized, educated, and rational man. There is a bias in the universe which favors unity. It is as though nature and nature's God had determined that our central experience should be the comprehension of unity. How paradoxical, then, that God's purpose, nature's processes, and man's society should so often and so compellingly seek to differentiate, to distinguish, and to individualize. Those who consciously or unconsciously seek to purchase unity at the price of individuality and diversity contradict one of the most pervasive tendencies in our experience. We are able to be one effectively because we have been many individually. Our differences and our distinctions in this ecumenical world are not sources of weakness and anarchy, but are the very basis out of which a rich and harmonious unity can develop. This process of diversification within a larger unity has been one of the distinguishing characteristics of our whole civilization. No other civilization has possessed the essential unity and the fascinating multiplicity characteristic of Western society. Christianity has divided and subdivided, each branch emphasizing in some distinctive way an important aspect of a common belief. Our political institutions have been structured in such a way that pluralism has been given concrete expression in our society. And our public lives are characterized by debate and constant, even acrimonious discussion of alternative solutions to our problems. Our experience with diversity of belief and practice has led us to recognize that alternative lifestyles, alternative political solutions, alternative social institutions, and most especially alternative educational programs are a major source of strength, stability, and richness in our society. How sad, then, how close to tragedy, that because of cultural and economic pressures, the private and specifically church-related schools have been driven into a corner from which only heroic exertion can free them. It is a time when the power and the influence and the resources of the state must be used in fostering and preserving differences rather than used for the purpose of undermining the private educational enterprises of its citizenry. There is not a private school in America that has not suffered from a national educational policy which penalizes differences and rewards the collectivization and homogenization of education. If we really wish diversity, if we wish to maximize the richness which alternative solutions can produce in our society, we will find ways to widen the choices available, to intensify competition, and increase the opportunities for genuine educational experimentation. Of course, it's being said that even were the private schools strengthened, and the church-related colleges would contribute little to the highly sophisticated, to the technologically advanced, to the scientifically oriented and completely secularized society into which we are moving. It is argued that not only has the church failed in its educational mission, but that the church-related school is an anachronism in a post-Christian world. Let me read you a quotation from Harvey Cox. The book is The Secular City, a book which has had an enormous influence and impact in our society. Cox writes, "The anachronistic posture of the church is nowhere more obvious than in the context of the university community. The church has made 3 attempts to come to terms with the university problem in America, all of which have been marked by a certain recidivism. The first was the establishment of its own colleges and universities. This, of course, was medievalism," Cox says, as though there's no room for medievalism in our world. The whole idea of a Christian college or university after the breaking apart of the medieval synthesis has little meaning. The term Christian is not one that can be used to refer to universities any more than to observatories or laboratories. No one of the so-called Christian colleges that now dot our Midwest is able to give a very plausible theological basis for retaining the equivocal phrase Christian college in the catalog. I'm quoting still from Cox. Granted that there may be excellent traditional, public relations, or sentimental reasons for calling a college Christian, there are no theological reasons. The fact that it was founded by ministers, that it has a certain number of Christians on the faculty or in the student body, that chapel is required or not required, or that it gets part of its bills paid by a denomination, none of these factors provides any grounds for labeling an institution with a word that the Bible applies only to the followers of Christ and then very sparingly. The idea of developing Christian universities in America was bankrupt even before it began. And I end my quotation. Well, now the charges are wild and hyperbolic. They belong to that school of public discussion and cocktail theology which make good press for the moment, but which will not bear scrutiny a second time. Still, the charge must be answered, even though it is a wild one, and the man who makes it is a wild man. I wish to assert in the first place that there is a fundamental difference between a Christian college and a secular university. And that difference lies above all in the kinds of questions it asks about the human condition and the type of response it makes to the human condition. There is an enormous and growing hunger in our society today for the life of the Spirit. Men yearn for meaning and purpose which goes beyond the material substance and the technological artifacts of our daily lives. Students want wholeness and integrity, commitment and dedication. And if the present frenzy among those under 30 means anything, it means that they have the liveliest fears of what Czeslaw Milosz called the suction of the absurd. What men fear today is the loss of selfhood, not through starvation or disease or even war, but through a total loss of meaning. The questions they most frequently ask are those great ontological questions which are the first questions of the Catechism. Who am I? What am I? Where am I going? These are the questions with which every life begins and every life ends. These are the questions which lie at the base of all patterns of social order. And these are the questions with which every sound education must commence. It is, of course, precisely these questions which the secular university refuses to raise. Education which does not pose these questions and which cannot answer them becomes a system for defrauding the individual of his humanity. It equips him with the keenest sensitivity. It gives him the widest and deepest experience of the past and the present. It places untold power in his hands, and it intimates that it is all to no purpose, and that the man who seeks something beyond the moment, a purpose beyond an animal will to satisfaction and to power, is simply expressing an outworn and outmoded prejudice, superstition. Is it really difficult to understand why our campuses are in turmoil and why men are fainting away and trembling at the thought of those things which are to come? I say that the reason for the existence of the Christian college is that it dares to ask those great ontological questions. Who am I? What am I? Where am I going? It and it alone can afford to face them squarely. Of course, they are asked at the secular university too. But they are asked not in the classroom, but in the mental health clinics operated for students, in the so-called crisis centers, which are springing up on campuses to deal with the deeply depressed and the suicidal. They are asked in all the out-of-the-way places of campus life, where students can still afford to be honest without risking a confrontation with the established intellectual nihilism which forms the climate of opinion at every major secular university. The first and most important role, then, of the church-related college is to ask the most difficult and fundamental questions men are capable of posing. Questions which the secular university cannot and will not venture. These are questions, again, with which not only every life, but every society and every education must begin. In the second place, this so-called post-Christian world does not make Christianity and the Christian colleges anachronisms, precisely because it is a world strangely like the world into which Christianity was born. To be sure, there are important differences between the secular city of Rome in the first century of the Christian experience and Mayor Lindsay's New York City, otherwise known as Fun City, in the first century of the post-Christian era. But I propose to you that those differences may be superficial from the standpoint of the human predicament, and that the contemporary Christian world and the contemporary Christian would not find himself a stranger in Hellenistic society. Christianity was born in the midst of urban problems. It became a world religion in an era when a great cultural crisis gripped the Mediterranean world. It was, at its outset, acquainted with both the extravagances of belief and the desperation of despair, which are so much a part of the climate of opinion in our own world. It came into existence at a time when the world promised more to men than ever before was available, but when cruel institutions and a crueler society cheated men of their humanity and defiled and destroyed their persons. The society in which Christianity came to birth was a society in which community was either disintegrating or had disappeared, in which slavery was an overwhelming reality, in which affluence and technology served to enlarge men's vices rather than to assist their virtues, and in which the sense of social and communal purpose was lost. It was, in short, a society not wholly unlike our own. In such a world, Christianity did not restore purpose and community and recreate social order by making two blades of grass grow where one had grown before. In fact, the world was materially poorer in the centuries following the triumph of Christianity than it had been in the period of Christianity's infancy. What Christianity did, what it did then, and what it can do now was restore meaning and vitality. The Christian church and the Christian college is at home in this world as it was at home in the world of the first century. Not in the world of the Middle Ages or the world of the Reformation, but the tragic and problematical world of the 20th century. It has dealt and dealt successfully with all these problems once before, and it will deal with them once more. But the church and the church-related college cannot do this by becoming secular, by assimilating itself to the tide of worldliness which threatens to engulf our whole society. But neither can it achieve the transformation of society by withdrawing from the daily lives of men. It must not succumb either to secularity or to isolationism and the ghetto mentality. The Church-Related College, therefore, has the mission not only of asking the right questions, but of doing something about the world in which it finds itself. It intends not only to inform, but to transform. It believes that the student must account in his actions for the faith he finds within himself. The Christian college has an obligation to prepare men and women to do God's work in the world by giving them the technical mastery necessary for the performance of their tasks. But once they have that technical mastery, they will discover that technique is not enough. Skill is never adequate, and science alone proves insufficient. One of the most significant events of our century, I think, is the erosion and the loss of faith in the notion that human problems are ultimately solvable through technological means. There is a growing awareness of the moral neutrality of technological means. We have witnessed all too often that bureaucracy and rationalization serve frequently irrational ends. We have discovered all too often that man has mastery over every part of nature with the exception of human nature. We have discovered to our disappointment that technical solutions to a particular problem often create a greater and a more dangerous problem in the process. A secular society which solves the population problem by abortion, the problem of the aged and the infirm by euthanasia, the problem of human behavior by the chemical alteration of mood and action, the problem of public information by the manipulation of the population through the media. To cite only a few self-evident examples, is not a society in which any man can find fulfillment. But it is not simply that technology often creates as many problems as it solves. That's not the essential question. It's far more often the case that human problems simply will not yield to technological solutions. Our world needs all the technique it can master, all the technique it can produce. I'm not attacking technical mastery. I'm not anti-rational or irrational, as many of the young are. Our world then needs all the technique it can muster, but beyond that, it needs the dedication and the purpose which will not yield to despair and nihilism when technical mastery fails, as fail it often does. And above all, the world needs the love and the greatness of spirit which enable men to give themselves when there is nothing else to give, and the problems they confront are beyond a ready and mechanical solution. The Christian college is the only educational institution in our society which insists that technique be tempered by the love of God and the love of His creation. It insists that men cannot do everything which is technically possible, that he must not do everything which is technically possible. It teaches men to hope when there is no technical solution, and to love when there is such a solution. It demands that our means be consonant with the ends for which God has created men. If a bridge between knowledge and humane and loving purpose was imperative. If ever it was necessary for men to question their use of power and the purposes of their actions, that time is the present. The secular university cannot and will not forge this link between the world of power and the world of the Spirit. To these eras and areas in which the church-related college teaches in terms of content, orientation, and skills, must be added those very important areas where the church-related college teaches by example. In the long run, teaching by example is always more impressive than teaching a theory. All theory is gray, Goethe said, and who is there who cares to deny it? Every man and every institution teaches best that which is itself. What then do the church-related colleges teach when they are most essentially themselves? I believe they teach two things in a fashion which marks their students throughout their adult lives. In the first place, the church-related college, when it is loyal to its heritage and dedicated to the fulfillment of its mission, teaches community by being a genuine community. Community, that word community, at the present time, is one of those magic words which evoke the aspirations and the hopes of our society. We yearn so intensely for community because our society makes life in community difficult. We do not have to go to Aristotle to discover that man cannot fulfill himself, that mankind cannot fulfill itself in isolation and estrangement from their fellow men. We know it instinctively, and we feel every day the consequences of the decay and the loss of community which is taking place about us. Why do you suppose it is that the alumni of small, and particularly the alumni of church-related colleges, remain so intensely loyal, not only to the institution, but to the friendships and associations which were formed at college? I believe it's because, having for the moment outgrown the family and its attendant community, the young adult is enabled for the first time to form a community which is distinctively his own. The role of the college in providing the young adult with a model for community is one of the most important roles the college has traditionally performed. It is precisely this role that the larger secular university has abdicated. The major universities now mirror completely the ant-heap societies in which they are lodged. Every university administrator who has the least insight into the current student mood knows that a major portion of his problem lies in the fact that he is incapable of creating a genuine sense of community on his campus. Community is not simply the product of living together in units small enough to permit everyone to know everyone else. Though, of course, that's a very important element in it. It helps. Above all, community arises from a common enterprise, a shared commitment, and a set of common experiences. Increasingly, the church-related college finds that teaching what a community is and how it functions is one of the most important missions for it And it realizes in fulfilling this mission that it is one of the few remaining genuine communities in our society. Finally, the church-related college plays a most important role in the formation of personality and the development of an appropriate lifestyle. It's more successful in enabling its students to develop a mature personality, one which combines within itself both a radical freedom and a reverent traditionalism, because it insists that there are models available who possess a sanction greater than that of momentary popularity. Has the meaning of the elaborate costuming of the present generation of students puzzled you? Certainly puzzles me as I walk down the streets of my campus and see the variety of costumes which students wear. I believe that they are in desperate search of a model. They believe that by putting on the clothes of someone else, by adopting the postures and the gestures of someone else, they can become that thing or that person. Not just any model, though. They want a model who's free, heroic, and committed. Christians have always felt the closeness of such models in Jesus and his saints. And it's not corny or fake pious to say that we cannot grow into maturity unless we appropriate to ourselves some of their characteristics. C.S. Lewis remarked on a number of occasions that it is not difficult to understand evil. Our experience of the universe leads us to expect it. Everything runs down, wears out, or falls apart. The puzzling thing in our experience is good. There is no problem of evil, but there's a real problem of good. And one of the most puzzling things about human behavior is the universal desire to be good. Now, of course, not all of us make it. But everyone, and especially the young, wants to be good. Everyone wants to be good. But our conception of how to be good depends in great measure on the models available to us. I do not wish to contend that the only models of goodness available in the world of higher education are located in the church-related colleges. That's pure nonsense. It does seem to me, however, that the likelihood of discovering the right model is better in the church-related college than it is at Megalopolis U. The qualities of personality and the kind of education I've been talking to you about are not anachronistic. They are exactly the sorts of things our whole society is discussing. The values we instinctively know that we must possess if we are to survive, or if we are even to want to seek to survive. Some people have given up on survival. It's mistaken to assume that the great questions of our time are scientific, institutional, technological questions. They're human questions. In the measure, then, that the church-related college seeks to answer those questions and to fill these human needs and aspirations, it will have fulfilled its mission. If it decides, however, to whore after false gods, if it decides to secularize itself and model itself on the insufficiencies of the state university, it will have lost its purpose and failed utterly. There is nothing quite so silly and pathetic as an amateur secularist. If the salt lose its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? Then it is fit only to be thrown out and trampled underfoot.